years ago, I worked at a mall as an elf in Santa's village. I had been hired from an agency just like all the other elves, photographers, security, and of course the mall Santa. The mall wouldn't hire anyone outside of the agency since background checks were very important to them. When I first started out, we had a really good team. Then the guy playing Santa quit and they brought in someone else. It was another cliche old chubby guy with a gray beard, but there was something really creepy and unsettling about this guy. His name was Arthur, and he always acted weird towards everyone. He didn't seem to know how to interact with people. Everyone felt very uncomfortable around him. But what I found weird was how Arthur acted worse towards females than he did guys. He was generally very rude to the women and a lot nicer to the guys. He was especially nice to me, which made me feel incredibly uncomfortable. Every time he spoke to me, he would compliment me about something and then look at me in the creepiest way.
Hey, darling, do you like candy canes?
No, I don't.
If you don't say yes, I'm gonna put you in my naughty list, darling.
Stop calling me that!
I even noticed he was nicer to the boys who sat on his lap. He would talk to them for way longer than the girls, and he seemed to give them special attention. It was all very strange. I mostly tried to avoid Arthur as much as I could, but it was difficult since we worked together all the time. I would always leave work as quickly as possible when my shift ended, so that he wouldn't have time to talk to me. After one shift, I was starting to leave when Arthur walked up to me.
Hey, can you do me a favor?
He gave me a creepy and awkward smile. I immediately wanted to leave, but I didn't think I could just ignore him.
What do you need?
Arthur then went into a whole story about how he had pulled some muscle in his back and couldn't drive home. Apparently, some kid had pulled his back from sitting in his lap. It all sounded like a lie to me, but I couldn't tell for sure.
So, do you think you could drive me home and help me up to my apartment?
I didn't want any part of it and I told him that I couldn't do it. I just wanted to leave, but he kept asking me over and over again. I refused him multiple times, but he wouldn't stop. He told me that he wouldn't be able to get home without my help, but I finally gave in and agreed to drive him home. The whole time we were in the car, I felt really creeped out. Arthur kept trying to make conversation, but it was all awkward and weird. I said as little as possible and just focused on getting to his apartment as fast as I could. Then at one point, he reached out and put his hand on my lap. It was creepy as hell. I was so grossed out and just wanted to get the whole thing over with. Finally, we got to his apartment. I just wanted to drop him off and get the hell out of there, but he insisted that he needed my help getting upstairs. So I reluctantly got out of the car and helped him up to his place. We moved really slowly, and Arthur leaned on me the whole time. We eventually made it to his door and I told him that I had to go. Arthur then told me to wait by the door for a second as he wanted to give me a gift for helping him. He then took out his phone and snapped a picture of me. Then he went to his room. I stood there confused and impatiently waited for him. Several minutes passed and Arthur still didn't come back. I began to feel sick to my stomach, and I had a very uneasy feeling that something was wrong, so I decided to leave. But then, as I started to turn around, Arthur appeared in the doorway out of nowhere. He was half naked, wearing only his underwear and holding a metal rod. He stared at me with a sick smile on his face, then swung the rod at me. I instinctively ducked as Arthur barely missed me and smashed the wall instead.
Help me!
I pushed Arthur to the floor and immediately ran down the hallway towards the elevator as fast as I could. I made it to the elevator and maniacally pushed the button for it to open. As I did, I looked behind me to see Arthur slowly slide out of his door. We made eye contact just as the elevator doors opened and he started running at me. I entered the elevator and frantically tried to close the door as Arthur got closer and closer. At the last second, the door closed just as Arthur smashed his rod into it. I could hear him slamming it against the door over and over again.
You can't run from me. I'm gonna smash your head open.
The elevator finally started to move downstairs and Arthur's beating grew quieter. As soon as I reached the first floor, I ran the hell out of the building. I didn't even think to get in my car. I just kept running and running, trying to put as much distance between me and Arthur as possible. When I had finally gotten far enough away, I entered a random store and called the cops. Arthur was later arrested at his apartment. It was later revealed that Arthur was a divorced man who was interested in younger men. He had allegedly killed multiple young guys in the greater Toronto area that were all around my age. He would then dismember them and put them in flower pots that he kept around his home. I remembered seeing several of them in his apartment, but what was even more disturbing is that Arthur took photos of his victims before and after killing them. That's when I remembered him taking a picture of me. I was completely traumatized but happy that I had gotten away before Arthur had taken the second picture. This story was inspired by a horrific case revolving around a man who worked as a shopping mall Santa Claus, who allegedly took the lives of 8 men and hid their remains inside plant pots that he would then rearrange from time to time. The culprit was a 70-year-old man named Bruce MacArthur, who preyed on multiple younger men in Canada's gay village and got away with a string of horrific crimes over 7 years. MacArthur would photograph his victims before and after they were taken out and kept a picture album as a grim trophy. When the police finally caught up with MacArthur, they found potential victim number 9 in his bed, with his before picture already taken. The man has since been sentenced and has been dubbed by the police as the serial killer Santa. This all happened around Christmas time. I always looked forward to the holiday. I enjoyed all the decorations and exchanging gifts with family and friends. But ever since I moved out of my parents' place, there was a problem. I moved to a small home in a quiet area. Everyone in the neighborhood was fine except for one person. It was this psychotic woman named Mel who just so happened to be my next door neighbor. She made living in the neighborhood rather difficult. I could often hear her from my house. She would always scream and yell things like she was talking to someone, but she lived alone. I thought at first that she could just be on the phone with someone, but then I caught her talking to herself a few times. She'd be outside in the backyard or on her front porch, chattering away to herself. It wasn't anything normal either. She sounded like a deranged psycho. Sometimes, she would be so loud that it was even hard for me to sleep. She could go on for hours at a time, without seeming to stop for a breath. Then, out of nowhere, she would just go quiet. It was kind of creepy. I never knew what set her off. What was even weirder was that she would sometimes claw and scratch at my door like a dog. Then she would groan bizarrely and make a lot of other weird noises. It was all really freaky, but I would just ignore her until she eventually left. My friends told me that I should just call the cops, but I didn't want to do that. I felt pretty bad for Mel. She obviously had some sort of mental disability, and I was sympathetic because I had family members with the same issues. I also felt bad because she lived alone. No one ever seemed to come check up on her either. It was sad. At first, I started to get used to her. Then things began to get even more disturbing. Mel became completely obsessed with me. I don't even know how it happened, but she practically began stalking me. She would wait outside so that she could talk to me before I left for work. And then she would be in the same spot when I came back. Sometimes she would stay outside my door for hours at a time, like she was hoping that I would let her in. It made me really uncomfortable, but I didn't know what to do about it. At first, she was more shy, but then she started telling me that she was in love with me. It was practically every time that I saw her. I tried to tell her that I didn't feel the same way, but she didn't seem to care. I tried to avoid her as much as I could, but it was difficult with her living right next door. This went on for a while. Over the years, I continually tried to give Mel signs that I wasn't interested, but it didn't stop her from making advances. It was getting ridiculous. She gave me gifts for every holiday despite me never getting her anything. Valentine's Day, Christmas, my birthday, it was all the same. I didn't want to accept any of them, but I didn't want to be rude. It was all way too awkward. I really didn't want anything to do with her, but I was afraid that she would snap if I told her. I never actually opened any of the gifts though. I just threw them in a closet. I didn't want to find out what kind of gifts Mel had picked out. I basically hated being at home due to Mel. She was always so unpredictable. I never felt like I could have anyone over because I was too scared that she'd interfere. I never knew what to expect when I came home from work. It was a bad situation, but it eventually got even worse. On Christmas Eve, the night just before Christmas, I was sleeping peacefully in my room when something woke me up. It was around 3 a.m. when I realized that it was Mel's weird groaning and scratching noises at the front door. This was really disturbing since it was so late. Mel had never come to my door in the middle of the night before. She had to be having another episode. I didn't want to call the cops on her, but I was annoyed as hell. It was way too late to put up with her shit. I went downstairs to open the door, and sure enough, Mel was standing right there. She looked creepy as hell. It freaked me out. Mel then offered me some Christmas gifts, holding them out in each hand. She had a raunchy calendar in one hand and a pair of shoes in the other. I got even more annoyed then and told her that I didn't want her presents.
What the hell is wrong with you? It's 3 in the morning!
Mel stared at me in disbelief for a second, and then she got really upset and tossed the gifts in my face. She then ran back to her house, crying hysterically. I felt bad, but I was fed up with her guilt-tripping me all the time even if she was disabled. I locked the door and headed back to bed, glad that it was over quickly. But as I walked towards the stairs, I suddenly saw Mel crawling in through my kitchen window. She fell through the window onto the floor and stumbled to her feet. She then pulled out a knife and started charging at me. I ran upstairs and slammed the bedroom door. I was terrified. She had completely snapped. But suddenly I realized there was something wrong. The bedroom door had no lock, and I realized this just before Mel came slamming into it. I threw my body up against the door and pushed back as hard as I could. She then started stabbing a knife through the door repeatedly as I backed off just in time. I held the door shut for as long as I could, but she eventually broke it down. I fell to the floor as she stood in the doorway, holding the knife over my head.
Please, don't! Please!
On December 25th of 2013, a woman named Melissa Young was jailed for life after being found guilty of the murder of her neighbor on Christmas Day. The victim's name was Alan Williamson. Melissa claimed that she allegedly saw a bright light and heard voices in her head before she flipped and did what she did. The motive for the woman's attack was because Alan had allegedly rejected her Christmas present of a pair of unisex trainers and a copy of the Sun's newspaper's 2014 calendar. Melissa has mentioned that if Alan had accepted the gifts from her, she would not have attacked him.
Everyone has stories about how crazy their relatives are, but I think mine might be one of the worst. It happened when I was younger, still in my early teens. I think about it sometimes, and it still scares me to this day. It happened around Christmas time. My family would always invite a bunch of people over for the holidays. It wouldn't just be for one day either. Friends and relatives would be in and out of the house for the entire month of December. It made it pretty hectic, but I enjoyed it. I liked seeing everyone. But there was this one woman that I had never been fond of. She was my mom's friend. I don't know how they had met, but they had known each other for years. My mom treated her like family and invited her over for the holidays just like everyone else. The problem was she was a little crazy. She had never been that nice to me. She would always pick on me because I was the youngest in the family. She would always make me the butt end of every joke and treated me like I was a little kid who didn't understand anything. It was frustrating, but I just ignored it. I figured I couldn't like all of my mom's friends. Then, over the years, it got a lot worse. She started to lose her mind and began to act completely psycho, like she had a mental condition. That's when her treatment of me went from annoying to scary. It was like she had a thing for me or something. She would still pick on me like always, but it felt different somehow. There was another level to it that made me feel uneasy. She would always single me out in the conversation and say the strangest things, too. I would catch her staring at me from across the room. She didn't even try to look away when I caught her doing it. It was really creepy. It got worse and worse as time went on. I started to miss the earlier days of her picking on me. At least then it wasn't so creepy and strange. I felt so uncomfortable around her. But my mom kept inviting her over and spending time with her. I didn't understand it because she would yell at my mom all the time. One second they would be having a normal conversation and then suddenly she would blow up over nothing. It was crazy. She would lash out at my mom over the phone too. I told my mom to forget about her, but my mom said we have to have sympathy because she was most likely bipolar. I didn't get it. I just wanted the woman to be out of our lives. But she continued to mess with me out of everyone else. She would always act insane, but she acted even worse towards me. It got to the point where I would dread the holidays because I knew she would be coming over. She basically ruined every party or event she was invited to. The other relatives even asked my mom to stop inviting her, but my mom refused. She had a weird soft spot for the woman. Every time the woman came for events like Thanksgiving or Christmas, she would act out and yell like a psycho. It didn't matter who it was directed at. Sometimes she would just scream at a wall. Of course, if I was in the room, she would normally yell at me. It always came in weird fits. One second she would be quiet and then she would blow up. Sometimes she would suddenly space out and stand perfectly still. That honestly freaked me out more than the yelling. It was very unsettling to see her just staring at nothing. When she wasn't in one of her screaming or staring fits, she would spend her time tormenting me in other ways. She would try to intentionally scare me by hiding behind something and then jumping out at me. Usually it would work too, especially when I was younger. Whenever she got me with one of her weird jokes, she would laugh about it forever. She sounded like a total psycho when she did. That was the part I hated most of all. Her laugh sent chills down my spine. So that's what I had to look forward to around the holidays. But then one particular year, it reached a whole new level. Whenever my family hosted Christmas, they liked to have people exchange gifts. Everyone would gather in one room and then would go around and take turns opening stuff. It was always really fun. That particular year, though, the woman got me a present. Everyone was handing out their gifts and enjoying themselves when suddenly, the woman walked over to me smiling widely and holding a present. She never got anyone gifts, so it was very strange to see she had brought me anything. I had no idea what it could be, but I was very uncomfortable to think that she had gotten me something. The box was pretty big too, and it felt heavy. She stared at me eagerly and urged me to open it. I reluctantly set it down and started tearing off the paper. Then I opened the lid, and what I saw was the most disturbing, horrific thing I had ever laid eyes on. There was a dead dog inside the box. She gave me a dead dog as a gift. She immediately started laughing with that same psychotic laugh while everyone else screamed. It was terrifying. I felt sick to my stomach and pushed through the box away from me. She just continued to laugh more and more, sending chills down my spine. Since that day, my parents have banned her from coming to any family events. We're all completely scarred from the ordeal. My mom still gets calls from the woman every now and then. She would leave disturbing voicemails asking how we're enjoying the dog. This story was inspired by a fan-submitted story revolving around a woman who allegedly gifted a dead dog to their family for Christmas. No one really knows the interior motive on why the woman would do such a thing, but from what the victim claims, it was most likely done out of sheer spite and jealousy. The victim hasn't heard of any updates from the woman since, but claims he's still traumatized as he's reminded of it every Christmas.